Hello and welcome to the Town Meeting TV coverage of general election right here in the state of Vermont 2024, and this program is part of a series of forums we are bringing you in advance of the primary election that will take place on Tuesday, August 13, 2024. As you know, Town Meeting TV hosts forum with all candidates and covers the questions you will see on the ballot, introducing you to the community decision makers and connecting you with issues that shape your local community. You can find all of the forums at cctv.org/primaries or on our Town Meeting TV YouTube channel. So where auto-generated captation is also available. On tonight's program, we will hear from Bram, Kleppner, Del Azaria, Larry, Lewack, Tiff, Bluemle, right? And also, you also can call to ask your question at 802-862-3966, 802-862-3966, okay? If you are tuning live, you can also ask the same questions by using the same phone number. We will also do our best to prioritize your questions, though we will screen calls to ensure that questions are not repeated. We ask that you share your name, the town in which you live in, and that your questions are directed to all candidates, not just one candidate. So let's get started a little bit with 1 minute opening statement, and we'll start with the incumbent Tiff, Representative Tiff Bluemle.
Thank you. 4 years ago, during the pandemic, people were finally talking about issues that I had worked on for years. Access to affordable childcare, health care, how we define essential workers, and what we pay them. Running for office offered to me at that time a new opportunity to advance those issues and others that the pandemic was exacerbating. But since then, my work in the legislature has also focused on how well the state serves its citizens. Serving on House appropriations isn't just about making decisions about who gets what funding, but about evaluating whether the money we're spending is making a difference, whether we're leaving federal dollars on the table, whether we've given state agencies the tools they need to make good on the commitments that we make to Vermonters. And I'm running for re-election to apply all that I've learned over the past 4 years to the core challenges that we've identified.
Okay, thank you so much. And Bram?
I'm running for the Vermont House because I think I can be helpful. Burlington and Vermont are facing a lot of big challenges: affordable housing, the 4 combined issues of homelessness and mental illness and addiction and crime, property taxes and education costs, healthcare costs, and climate change. I just finished 13 years as CEO of a mid-sized manufacturing company, Danforth Pewter in Middlebury. I also serve on the Vermont Climate Council and previously served on the Vermont Tax Structure Commission and spent 5 years as co-chair of Vermont's Medicaid and Exchange Advisory Board. And I think that this mix of business background and policy background across several policy areas will be helpful as we address the big, complicated challenges that we have in front of us.
Thank you. And Del?
Thank you. And I want to start by thanking Town Meeting TV and the other candidates. This is a great opportunity for us and for the voters in Chittenden 13 to get to know us. My husband Alan and I moved to Burlington 30 years ago. We raised 2 children here who thrived in the Burlington schools. I want to ensure that's the case for all Vermont families. I'm running because my experience and my expertise are what we need in the legislature right now. I want to work towards solutions for our biggest issues, including housing and homelessness, school funding, and the environment. Having worked as a lawyer in state government for 6 years under 2 governors and as an environmental advocate for another 4, I know what it takes to get things done in Montpelier. I want to help bridge the divide between the legislature and the governor, or at least ensure that the legislature passes laws that will be fully implemented. Especially now, with the Supreme Court dismantling abortion rights, environmental protections, and more, we need people who have the technical savvy and experience to protect our rights and our future.
Thank you so much. Larry?
Hi, I also want to thank Town Meeting TV for making this conversation possible and for putting it out into the world. And I also want to appreciate the hard work that Tiff has done for the last 4 years to represent our district in Montpelier, and that Gabrielle Stebbins did as well, who's stepping down from her position and creating an opening for this position, this race. So my background is a lot of it's in the nonprofit human services. I worked for over 20 years as a direct service provider, social worker, mostly providing services to people with disabilities in Vermont, and also running programs that provided those services. I have extensive experience as a citizen advocate in the Vermont State House. I worked with legislators to advance property tax reform starting many years ago, civil rights and services for individuals with disabilities. In that capacity, I built coalitions across the aisle with representatives from every party. I have successfully lobbied for important legislation that was adopted and signed into law. So I understand what that's about and how to get things done there. I have experience in local, state, and national advocacy, and I have a lot of relevant experience beyond that. For example, I served for 4 years as a member of the Burlington Planning Commission. I was a founding organizer of the Callahan Park Community Garden. Was a member for 11 years of Vermont Governor Howard Dean's Council of Environmental Advisors, so I served at the highest levels working on environmental issues with advocates from across the state. I was a board member at the Opportunities Credit Union of Vermont, which is the most important community development credit union in the state. I have also served as a nonprofit management consultant working with state and national nonprofits on various issues, including strategic planning and financial management. So I feel like I have a really strong skill set to bring to this role. I understand how government works at the local, state, and national level, and I would be eager to put those skills to work on behalf of the residents of the Burlington South End and Hill section.
Well, the people of Chittenden District, you have skilled people that are ready to serve and hopefully make good decisions. So since Bram, you started with a question, as part of your introduction to property taxes and education, let's start with you about this question. This year, many Vermonters will see a double-digit increase in their property taxes, and nearly a third of school budget failed on town meeting day. How will you approach education funding reform and property taxes for the coming year? And after you, we can go with Dale. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Property taxes are driven by education spending, and if we want to lower property taxes and reduce their growth, we have to address education spending. And the biggest single driver of the growth in education spending is the growth in healthcare costs for people working in the education system. Addressing healthcare costs is hard and it's complicated, and we have to deal with it. I believe we're going to address healthcare further on in this discussion, so I will address that in more detail when we get to that question. But in terms of property taxes, education costs, one is addressing the healthcare costs, and then the second is, we need to make a conscious decision between living with high taxes or doing some consolidation. And consolidation is painful, and I strongly support neighborhood elementary schools. But I think above that level, particularly in the parts of the state where the student population is declining, we need to acknowledge that we can either consolidate or live with high taxes. And as we consolidate middle schools and high schools, school districts and supervisory unions, we can see a lot of savings. We are a small state with a small population, and we've got something like 130 school districts and 50 supervisory unions. Hawaii, with double our population spread across 6 islands, has 1 school superintendent. I don't think 1 is the right answer for Vermont, but I also don't think that 50 plus is the right answer for Vermont.
Thank you so much, and also for being on time. Let's go. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So as I've been out knocking on doors in our district and meeting people, this issue is one that has come up a lot. People are really concerned, but they're concerned about 2 things. One is they're concerned about the impact of the property taxes on their personal wallets and finances. The other is they're also concerned, and I hear this over and over again, about making sure that our schools are adequately funded. And I hear a lot of people who say, we just need to find a way to do it differently. Another thing that I've heard is about finding a tax system that is less regressive, that ensures that people who have the ability to pay are being asked to pay, and people who don't have the ability to pay aren't being priced out of Burlington or out of Vermont. So those are the approaches and concerns that I come into this question with. I know that this year the legislature called for a study on this issue, and the results of that study will be available in the late fall, just in time to feed into next year's legislative session. And I really look forward to getting that study and working with the information that that study group puts together in next year's session. There's been study commissions before. This is nothing new. This problem has come up before. It's also nothing new. But I think that the 14% increase that people saw this year has really made people pay attention, and I think there's going to be increased appetite for dealing with it. So I look forward to doing that and to making sure that our schools are funded and that Vermont remains affordable.
Excellent. Thank you. And incumbent, yes, go ahead.
Incumbent Bluemle.
Tiff, Bluemle, yes.
Well, so I agree with Bram that healthcare costs drove a lot of the expense, but the real estate market also did, in the end of federal COVID funding that schools have been using to fill holes, and significant growth in the need for mental healthcare supports for students, as you know, in the wake of the pandemic. And school repairs and construction costs, all of them drove up that $250 million overage. And the work of the legislature, you know, reduced the tax liability by a third. And our rate of increase is less than a lot of places in the state. But we can't keep buying down the tax rate. And I agree with both of the folks who've spoken. You know, we count on the surplus that we had this year and last year to do that. And the current trajectory, so if the current trajectory is unsustainable, then then we have to have hard conversations about a lot of things that we have kind of punted down the road, like, you know, whether we fund education through the property or the income tax, you know, as two successive tax commissions have done. What to do about crumbling school buildings, whether to consolidate districts and schools, and whether to tuition students to private schools. And finally, this was a suggestion that was made in one of the tax commission reports, whether we separate healthcare costs from the ed fund. I mean, the good thing about what happened this year is that there is now more resolve to deal with some of the questions that we've been bouncing about but kind of skirting.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And Larry?
So replacing or fixing Vermont's broken education funding system is my top priority in this campaign. And interestingly, 40 years ago, I worked with a group of folks from around the state to sponsor a coalition called the Vermont Fair Tax Initiative. And this was an effort to bring some reality to the legislature around the impact of our reliance on the property tax. This was before Act 60, and passing Act 60 created some momentum, aided by the Brigham decision, to equalize school spending and put it more on the state to collect and redistribute school taxes to communities that really needed a boost from what their own property tax revenues could generate. But I think it's become very apparent to everyone in Vermont now that the public consensus around how we support schools is pretty much collapsed, and we need a better system in place. And back then, 40 years ago, those of us working on this issue came up with this idea that we should shift our education funding method away from property tax-based system where we're looking at assessing the tax due based on the value of someone's primary residence, and more towards income-based taxation. And here we are, 40 years later, having the same conversation. I'm not a big fan of these commissions. I feel like it's really important to to assemble a coalition in the legislature to find the political will to get that change made. And I was a supporter of the wealth tax that passed the House but wasn't taken up by the Senate. I feel like that's a direction we need to go. We should also talk about decoupling Vermont's income tax rates from the federal tax rates to avoid passing along all of those benefits that only benefit wealthy individuals.
Yeah. Thank you for the good segue of our next question about progressive tax initiative. And as you all know, this year Democrats in the House proposed a new tax on the state highest earners and largest asset, including the increased income tax on earners over 500,000 K, right? An increased property transfer tax of over properties assessed at over 750 K, and an increased corporation income tax. Do you support raising taxes on highest earners and wealthier Vermonter? And let's start with Dale.
Thank you, and I think I actually have a pretty short answer to this question.
That's good.
Which is to say, yes, I do. I think that our income tax system has, over time, become less and less progressive. And I think a progressive income tax system is what we need. I think the rich keep getting richer and the poor are struggling, and we need to do something about that. I think there's some specifics in there that I have some questions about. I'm not sure that the property transfer tax is worthy of increasing, because that then creates certain disincentive for property transfers that might be overall beneficial in terms of facilitating people buying houses and things like that. So I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure exactly about the corporate tax, but I do think that a more progressive tax system in general would benefit us all.
Excellent. Thank you. Bram, go ahead.
So certainly true that the rich have gotten richer and the poor and middle income levels are struggling. And when I served on the Tax Structure Commission, we took a pretty hard look at who the higher earners are, who the people are who are making $500,000 a year. And it turns out the vast majority of those people who make $500,000 in any given year only do it once. There aren't people whose paychecks are that big year after year after year. It's mostly people who have sold a business or sold a farm, and so I'm not sure that that particular number and that particular approach, unless we nuance it to exclude one-time events, is a great idea. And the reason for that is people selling a business or a farm have spent years to build this, and they are counting on that money. They haven't made that much money before, and they're not going to make that much money ever again, and they're counting on that to fund their retirement. And I'm not sure we want to undermine people's retirement plans with a kind of blanket tax. Relative to the property transfer tax, I think the number $750,000 in Burlington may not be the right level. Relatively modest houses now sell for that amount and more. So that may be burdening the transfers of more modest properties that were not the intention. So I'd want to take a really close look at who the Vermonters are, what the properties are, and what the consequences of those would be before we went forward.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And Larry, please.
So I would co-sponsor or reintroduce H.A. 29, which was the wealth tax that we've been talking about here, but that didn't make it across the finish line. I firmly believe, as I suggested earlier, that it's time for the wealthiest Vermonters to pay their fair share. What we know from looking at tax impacts of people in various income quartiles is that those who are at the higher end of the income scale are paying a much smaller percentage of their overall income towards state and local taxes than the rest of us are. And I've talked to a number of people as I knock on doors in the district who are burdened by what they're paying, if particularly those on fixed incomes. Property taxes have gone up and up for them and their incomes have not. I do think that we need to move towards this. And I would just quickly say that in Massachusetts, and they were able to pass through a statewide initiative, a proposal that was similar in scope to the wealth tax that was proposed here. And there was a lot of lobbying against that referendum by folks who represent wealthy individuals in Massachusetts, and a lot of statements that wealthy individuals would flee the state as a result of their adopting this measure. And a year after it was implemented, that has not been the case at all. Certainly you hear reports of individuals who have moved, but people have many reasons for moving. But more importantly, that single change to state statute in Massachusetts has yielded almost $2 billion in revenue in the first year. And all of that money has gone into enhancing state funding for infrastructure improvements in schools. It's been an outstanding and very worthwhile policy move, and I suspect we would have a similar result here in Vermont, where we'll hear a lot of people who are crying that this is going to ruin Vermont and everyone who has means will move out. That's not going to happen. And I think it has the potential to generate substantial revenue for the state to fund our schools and to fund other critical needs.
Thank you. We have a caller, but before we take the caller, we'll ask Representative Bluemle to answer the question.
Sure. I'm a student of tax policy and am trying to learn as much as I can about about this particular issue. I think any tax increase has to be evaluated in terms of what it's intended to achieve, and also kind of the history of taxation and across different groups. And this year, I supported 829. And its proposed marginal tax rate increase. And I did so for several reasons. One, testimony offered in Ways and Means Committee had clarified that the increase would affect just 1% of Vermonters. The very taxpayers who saw significant cuts 6 or 7 years ago. The highest bracket, 8.75%, applies to households earning $242,000 or more. And it seems reasonable that somebody making twice or 5 times or 10 times that amount might bear a heavier tax burden. I take to heart what Bram said about one-time infusions of income. So I think I can't make a blanket statement about yes or no. I supported this also, though, the 829, because the tax increase was to fund a major investment in housing, which is a critical need over a 10-year period, and after which the rate could be reset. I also received a whole lot of emails from constituents who said that they would be affected by that tax hike, and they supported it, seeing it as a kind of intergenerational transfer. So it's kind of a yes and no. In principle, yes. I think that you have to drill down, though, to the specifics to know if it's a good idea.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you all for answering the question. And we have a caller. We will take him, and we ask that you share your name, the town you live in, and the question directed to all candidates, not just one in particular. So let's take it. Hello, caller. Hello, can you hear us? Okay. Hello, caller. Hi. Hello, caller. Can you introduce yourself and the town you're calling in from?
Hi, my name's Jana Ossoff. I live in Colchester, but I work in Burlington. And my question for the candidates is, do you support moving Vermont away from the use of prisons? And would you support investing in alternatives to incarceration?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the question, and I think we will start with Larry and go down that way.
So I am a student of criminal justice reform, and I worked on that in some of my legislative advocacy in Vermont. I in particular worked on supporting individuals with serious mental illness who were incarcerated and were treated very poorly in the prison system, people who were psychotic or deeply in depression, who were thrown into segregation for weeks or months at a time with zero treatment. And the piece of legislation I worked on specifically created a approach that required the state to do better than that by those prisoners and not incarcerate people in segregation simply because they were symptomatic with serious symptoms of a serious mental illness, and provide a case plan for their release so that they would make a transition into services. So I've been there, I've worked on that. I feel like it's really important for everyone to see Ava DuVernay's movie 13 to understand the effects of the prison industrial complex on our people, and particularly people of color, have been severely damaged by disparate impact and over-incarceration. And even though Vermont is in some ways a leader for opportunities for people to make an early exit from facing charges through alternatives to incarceration, specifically through probation, monitoring, and through community justice initiatives. I think we still have a long way to go. Our criminal justice system and our courts in particular are very backed up right now because we don't have enough judges to hear cases, and we need to ameliorate that problem as soon as possible.
Okay, wonderful. Tiff?
Yeah, I do definitely. Sorry, stepping back, I used to be the director of Vermont Works for Women, and we ran programming, vocational programming in all the women's prisons because they kept moving the women around. And and you know, a lot of women are in prison for writing bad checks, for possession of drugs for the third time. There are a lot of people who are in prison just awaiting trial. And I very reluctantly support the creation of a new women's prison. The Chittenden facility should be razed and repurposed in some positive way, because it's a terrible facility. It was meant to be a jail. That said, I do think that there are benefits to going to a new facility. It's so funny, I'm having so much trouble answering this question because I believe that alternatives to incarceration are many. They've been piloted in all kinds of places, and that's what I would like to see. I don't sit on the committee of jurisdiction. I haven't been involved in those conversations, and the train is already out of the station. So my concern is, how many beds are we going to fund at that facility? And I'm very interested in the transitional facility that they have committed to building.
Wonderful. Bram?
So first, let me say, I am strongly opposed to private prisons that are run by for-profit companies, and very much opposed to Vermont's using those and sending money to those companies. The incentives are all wrong. You know, what we want our criminal justice system to do, it has a few purposes, but one of them is to help people start over and get on the right track with their lives. And you know, for-profit prisons, they make more money if someone reoffends and is recommitted to their care. So it's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. I do think that there is a role for prisons to play in terms of, you know, some people who are convicted of particular crimes should be imprisoned. I do not believe that anyone who is awaiting trial should be in a prison. As we have heard, you know, there are jails for that purpose that are specifically designed to hold people for short periods of time. And you know, justice delayed is justice denied. You know, we are not doing our duty to our fellow citizens by holding them for long periods of time awaiting trial. And the legislature did address that. They added more money this year for more judges to help address the backlog. So I think, you know, with a limited role, I do support the use of prisons, but it needs to be very focused and very specific, and no private prisons, and not using prisons for jail time.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to say I agree with a lot of the things that have already been said up here. I think the importance of restorative justice and community justice programs, I think those are invaluable, and we should be supporting them. I also have seen and heard about breakdown between the police, the prosecutors, and the judicial system, and I think that that's a problem. It doesn't directly answer the caller's question about the use of jails, but I think that the fact that we have these different groups who are working on criminal justice, who are not in alignment with each other, and who are having trouble developing into a coherent system is not helping us. And I think that feeds some of the problem, and I think it feeds some of the frustration that people have with crime and with people reoffending. I agree with the thing that Bram mentioned, that we have just recently increased funding for courts, and I think that reducing the backlog that existed before COVID went off the charts during COVID and has never gotten back to where it should be will help mete out fair justice through these various alternatives and through imprisonment when that's the appropriate solution.
Excellent. Perfect on timing. Thank you. We are going to switch and talk about housing a little bit. And we're going to start for this one with incumbent Representative Bluemle. Housing. In the past session, Democrats in the House proposed spending in an addition of $100 million per year for 10 years on publicly subsidized affordable housing. This bill was not taken up by the Senate. Will you support the level of public investment in housing? Is housing crisis due more to regulatory failure and under-investment?
Yeah, I vigorously supported H 829, and I was deeply disappointed when it didn't get a hearing in the Senate. That said, parts of the bill related to disability housing and eviction did make it into the Act 250 bill, which was great. The changes that we made to that bill will exempt developments in downtowns and village centers from Act 250 review, and it'll incentivize new construction, as will investing in roads and water systems to reduce development costs. But I want to be clear, I don't believe that zoning and permitting reform will produce the 7,500 units of housing that we need for low and middle income households and adults with developmental or physical disabilities, seniors and those in recovery. That kind of housing doesn't pencil out. And Vermont currently allocates 50% of the property transfer tax to affordable housing and conservation. And in a good year, that translates to about $14–15 million. We'll never close the gap in housing at that rate. So I want us to be bold as Madeline Kunin was when she created the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, because I think we owe this to our children and to future generations and our economy.
Excellent. Thank you. And let's go with Bram.
I think we are suffering from both private and public underinvestment and regulatory hurdles that make it hard for private developers to build affordable housing. It takes a long time and it has a lot of expense, and there's a decent amount of uncertainty involved as they undertake these projects. I think there are a lot of good reasons to build more densely in town and city centers. It makes it possible for people without cars to walk to work, to walk to grocery stores, to walk to social services, and people with cars who just want to drive less. And there's already water and sewer in those places for the most part. And building in city centers helps reduce suburban sprawl and rural sprawl, which in turn helps keep agricultural lands open and reduce deforestation and forest fragmentation. we've taken some steps in the right direction, as Representative Bluemle mentioned. Removing the Act 250 requirement for housing being built in towns and cities that have zoning is a great step forward. Burlington has started allowing additional units, and we can do more. You know, we can look at phasing out single-family zoning, period, and we can look at implementing a statewide building code for affordable housing so that developers don't have to build something different in each town that they build in. We need to support public-private partnerships. And finally, for Burlington, I would say that we need to work with UVM to restart the Catamount Woods housing project, which was designed to house something like 540 students, which would remove a decent amount of pressure from the Burlington rental market.
Wonderful. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So housing is the key to so many of the problems that we're facing these days. It's obviously key to the homelessness problem. It's key for climate resilience. It's key for economic development. As I've been going around knocking on doors, I hear about housing a lot. And this is from people who have places to live. But I've talked to people who live in apartments who have been searching for years and can't find a house to buy. I talk to people in a house who can't afford to downsize because they can't sell the house that they have that they no longer really need, because replacing it with something smaller is either not available or too expensive. So we do need an all of the above approach. We need to support subsidized housing with the bill that you mentioned. We also need to make it easier to develop market rate housing, particularly in places that are well suited to it. The Act 250 changes that Representative Bluemle and Bram Kleppner were talking about is something that I worked on when I was at the Department of Housing and Community Development as General Counsel. We worked on the very first iteration of that idea of making it easier to build in places that are well suited for development, our downtowns and our village centers, especially those that have water and wastewater and roads, increasing investment in water and wastewater systems, especially in the villages that don't have them already, and then on the flip side, protecting the other spaces, the mountainsides, the hilltops, the wetlands, and those places that are critical for climate resilience and for our environment. So I was so glad to see that pass this year. I think it will make a help. I think that we also need to continue and increase our support for subsidized housing.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
So I would agree with the all the above premise and ideas that we've been talking about here. In my day job as a town planner, I actively work to remove regulatory barriers to building more housing in the rural town that I serve, Charlotte. Some towns have historically, I think we must recognize that with respect to regulatory barriers and permit reforms, that there's a dark history of zoning in this country that for many years towns have used zoning to keep out BIPOC and low-income Vermonters, make it more difficult to build more diverse housing types. And I think Act 47 that the legislature passed last year, the Home Act, took some important steps to address some of those inequities and specifically require communities to allow duplexes to be built in any lot that was approved for single family or single unit residences, and to also ease up some of the rules for multifamily housing development. Definitely important and worthwhile steps that I support, and to help my own town kind of come to terms with that, to change our own regulations. In 2023, the legislature approved $200 million in new investments in housing programs. But before we can spend all that money, we really need to come to terms with other barriers to building more workforce and affordable housing, which include things like access to affordable financing, training the construction industry workforce, and continuing the process of local permit reform. And I would support all of that if elected.
Wonderful. Again, people of Chittenden District, you have a big problem right now with great people who understand and who care deeply about the community and also serving the state. Now we are going to shift a little bit and talk about emergency shelters. As you know, it's related also to housing. So Vermonters reported that 3,295, right, people experiencing homelessness in 2023. up from 1,110 in 2020. This summer, the state is rolling back its pandemic era emergency shelter capacity across the state, pushing hundreds more Vermonters into the street. How will you approach the need for emergency shelter, and how should the state pay for it? And I think for this question, we will start with Mr. Bram.
Thank you. There's some recent research at the University of Washington that was really eye-opening. They looked at what was driving homelessness and different levels of homelessness in different cities around the country. And their data is very clear. I haven't read their book, but I've looked at their data, that homelessness, the level of homelessness is not driven by mental illness, not driven by the level of addiction, not driven by the level of poverty, not driven by the level of social benefits. The data is very clear, and it became the title of their book. Homelessness is a housing problem. The two factors driving homelessness levels in different cities are the vacancy rate for rental units and the average cost of rental units. So again, affordable housing is key in the medium and long term to solving this problem. I think we have, in the short term, we have a humanitarian obligation to provide our unhoused neighbors with minimal shelter, just to simply to minimize the human suffering of being unhoused. And it is not particularly expensive to provide water and toilets to the unhoused community, and it's not a huge investment. We should be making that investment. In terms of providing shelter, I think we need to reactivate the hotels and motel rooms that are not in use or are vacant and abandoned, reactivate those for immediate use. And we need to look around the country to figure out who has found mobile, portable, small units that can provide minimal shelter for people. I say we need to balance, and my time is up, so I'll wrap it up there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Larry, please.
So I think it's a commonly heard complaint on the streets of Burlington that people see a lot of houseless individuals hanging out and are concerned about the behaviors and feel at times unsafe when they're trying to enjoy our downtown. We got to this place through a variety of issues. I do think that there's a relationship between the behaviors that people are concerned about in our downtowns and alongside some of our roadways and parks, and the drug issue, as well as untreated mental illness. And so addressing these problems requires a comprehensive approach. I have read up on a county in the Portland metro area in Oregon that has taken this on, a more comprehensive solution, which includes opening additional shelter capacity. It includes refocusing social services so that they're available when people are contacted, either through staying in a shelter or an encounter with police, to make sure that they understand what are the options available to them, and increasing access to treatment programs. Here in Burlington, I think we could start by increasing our low barrier shelter capacity, probably starting with reopening the temporary shelter at the VFW Hall downtown, which I think is going to happen soon. I also would like to see nearby towns step up, so it's not just Burlington's problem. I think these costs can be covered by dedicating increased rooms and meals tax on lodging and short-term rentals. We, according to the recent Supreme Court decision in the Grants Pass case, we actually can just evict people who choose to live outside, but that is not the right thing to do. And I agree that it's inhumane, and we need more interventions and services and less of a draconian just sweep them up and push them out of public sight.
Okay, wonderful. Dale, please.
Thank you. So homelessness is just a heartbreaking human crisis, and it makes daily living almost impossible for so many people. It's hard to keep a job. It can be a trigger to return to substance abuse. People need a safe, stable place to stay. And I think we as a society have an obligation to make sure that people are safely housed. It is a housing problem, and I absolutely agree that the medium and long-term solution is to increase the housing supply in the short term, we need to make shelters available. And I think, we've seen different kinds of shelters. We've seen shelters that provide people a place to sleep and require them to leave during the day. And that can be really problematic. It can be problematic because it just leaves people at loose ends. And that leads to some of the behavioral problems that we see. It leads to some of the feelings of being unsafe in our downtowns and in our parks. And adequate funding for shelters that are available to people throughout the day will make a huge difference.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we are going now to shift and talk a little bit about the political temperature at the State House.
Did Tiff answer that question?
Tiff, go ahead.
I
Sorry.
didn't answer that question.
Thank
To
you.
be honest, really, what everybody has said, I very much agree with. And yeah, it's heartbreaking to see what has happened to so many people. And I've read the book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, or let's say I've read half of it, which is pretty true for most books that I read, but it was very convincing. And I think that, and I think it's very easy to kind of individualize homelessness, right? Homelessness is the result of individual vulnerabilities, and but the vast majority of folks, come to homelessness from a number of different reasons, and so I don't have anything to add. I think y'all did a great job in summing up kind of the complications, really, of addressing homelessness.
Wonderful. Thank you, and thank you for that reminder. As you know, political temperature, I think political differences were at front center this biennium, with the governor vetoing a record number of bills passed by the legislature, and the legislature in turn overriding a record number of those vetoes. Talk about a time you worked across differences to accomplish something, and how you may approach collaborating with colleagues that do not agree with you. And we will start with Dale.
Thank you. So I'd like to go back to the Act 250 bill that we talked about and the compromises there, because that was it was a pretty exciting opportunity to combine the people who wanted to protect the natural environment and the people who wanted to develop housing, and find the common threads between them, because everybody agreed that housing should exist in certain places and not in other places. And I think with a lot of these kinds of issues, the biggest thing that we can do is listen. I think one challenge that the legislature has had is that the governor has waited too long to start talking, and that's made it hard for the legislature to listen. One of the things that I would like to do is use my experience working for this governor, as well as for his predecessor, Governor Shumlin, to encourage earlier and more complete dialogue about the reasons that the administration would support a bill or wouldn't support a bill, what changes would be useful. It's been a tough problem for the legislature because the goalpost has often changed, where the administration has said that they would support something and then come back and said, well, no, we won't. And I think that what I would like to bring to that conversation is having been in the other chair and being able to perhaps use that experience to help bridge those divides.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much. And let's go with Larry.
Thanks. So I will give a couple of examples of where I worked to bridge the political divide. When I was working as a mental health advocate at the State House, representing the National Alliance on Mental Illness of Vermont, I worked on drafting legislation that, in the topic of guardianship for individuals with psychiatric illness, and ended up in conversations in the State House with a Republican House member and a state senator, both of whom I respected deeply, and they both helped me understand the disadvantages of advocating for guardianship, because basically it comes down to an individual loses all of their rights when guardianships are filed and signed. So I heeded that advice, and instead I chose to focus on outpatient treatment orders, which was a more direct route to making sure that individuals who were seriously psychotic and couldn't make good choices were able to be encouraged and required to participate in treatment. Another example is I served on the Burlington Planning Commission for 4 years, and there were projects where I had significant policy differences on looking at a particular permit project where there were friends on both sides of the issue. People have had very strongly held views, and I knew that I was going to probably lose some friends whichever way I went on a particular project vote. But I think that you win some and you lose some, and hopefully you learn to treat people, even people you disagree strongly with civility and respect for all.
Okay. And Tiff? Yep, thank you.
You know, so I've been head of a small nonprofit. I was 17 years at one, and then another 5 years at another before I ran for the legislature. And you know, when you're a small little nonprofit, you have to appeal to. You have to work with everybody, and you have to find common ground because you'll never be able to go it alone. And that that was kind of a relief to me, because then I realized, wow, I don't have to know everything, and I don't have to have all the resources. And so it kind of helped spur a practice of trying to figure out, you know, how do we build a bridge? And you know, sometimes it was employers. In the case of the gender equity work, it was men. And you know, and I think that what's critical is that you begin from a position of curiosity. You know, tell me what you think about this, and I really want to know, so I have to listen, and that's the start of it. There was a bill that Gabrielle and I got passed after 4 years that reformed the child abuse registry process, and that was a tough bill. Nobody wanted to touch it the first 2 years. The third year I got a promise we'll take it up next year, so the fourth year. Now the whole process, and I was only part of it, really hinged, on helping work with DCF to help them see the advantages to doing this. Sorry.
Thank you. Bram?
Thank you. You know, this is a time when I was not effective at working across differences and then fixed it. The Climate Council is composed of 15 members appointed by the legislature, including me, and 8 members of the administration. And typically the administration has managed outside consultants and research projects. And one came up, and I tried to suggest that on that one, the council should manage it directly, so that the data and the reports weren't filtered through the administration back to the council. I did a bad job of expressing that, and it sounded to people in the meeting as though I were accusing the administration of burying data and conclusions or slanting them that they didn't like. I'm grateful to other members of the council who called me on that immediately, and I immediately apologized, and then I put the apology in writing and asked that that apology be appended to the minutes of that meeting. And then we sat down to figure out how to make a process that worked for everyone. And it was very simple, that the administration would in fact continue per the original process to manage the outside consultants, and they would give the council access to the data and to the original reports from the consultants directly. So very, very simple resolution. And as part of that, the Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources, Julie Moore, sent me Middlesex's civil invocation that they read before every town meeting, which I think is great guidance for all of us in working together, and I'll just read it briefly. Before every town meeting in Middlesex, they read this: "We have come together in civil assembly as a community in a tradition that is older than our state itself. We come together to make decisions about our community. As we deliberate, let us advocate for our positions, but not at the expense of others. Let us remember that there is an immense gap between saying, I am right, and I believe I am right. And that our neighbors with whom we disagree are good people with hopes and dreams as true and as high as our own. And let us always remember that, in the end, caring for each other in this community is of far greater importance than any differences we may have.
Thank you for sharing that, and please send it to the Burlington City Council as well. All right, now this is a lightning round. This is only a yes or no question, or less than 10 seconds. Okay. Should private schools be funded by public dollars? Larry?
No.
No.
In certain cases.
Okay. Yes or no?
It's not a yes or no answer.
No.
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 No. Wonderful. Do you support raising the age of family court jurisdiction? Tiffany?
Yes. I mean, the delay is really unfortunate.
Wonderful.
Yes.
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 No.
No. Wonderful. Should biomass burning wood play a role in emission reduction strategies? Dell?
No, it's dirtier than gas.
Okay.
Yes, biomass emits an enormous amount of carbon dioxide, and it must be part of the strategy. Phasing it out must be part of the strategy.
Yes. Wonderful. Tiff?
Yes.
Yes.
No long term, but the McNeil plant plays a key role in the transition to net zero. So.
Did Governor Scott overstepped his authority by appointing Zoe Sanders as interim education secretary? Bram?
No, but he certainly overstepped good judgment.
Okay, wonderful. Dale?
Yes, he overstepped.
Yes. Tiff?
Yes, he overstepped.
And Larry?
Yes, and I support the legal challenge to that action by the two state senators.
Okay, where do you get the news, Mr. Larry?
I have online subscriptions to VT Digger, the Boston Globe, and the Washington Post, and read them every day.
Wow. Dale?
VT Digger, 7 days in the New York Times.
Okay. Bram?
Exactly what Dale said. VT Digger, 7 days, and the New York Times.
Okay, Tiff?
I would also add MSNBC because I do like Rachel Maddow, and I subscribe to a lot of blogs.
Okay. And Tiff, do you ride the bus?
I don't ride the bus because I walk or ride my bike in Burlington.
Okay. Larry?
I don't to work because there's no bus service to Charlotte. I wish I could. But.
Okay. Yes?
I commuted by bus to Montpelier for 5 years until the pandemic had me switch to remote work. Now I commute to Montpelier 1 day a week.
Okay. Larry?
And I did commute to Middlebury from time to time on the bus and occasionally by bike and the rest of the time by car.
And same line, what's your favorite ice cream in Vermont?
That's such an unfair question. Maple Creamies, Ben & Jerry's, non-dairy, oatmeal dream pie, the Sisters of Anarchy, it's all good.
Yes. Tiff? Go ahead.
Ben & Jerry's strawberry cheesecake.
Larry?
My favorite Ben & Jerry's flavor is pistachio, and I assure everyone that this has nothing to do with the fact that Jerry Greenfield has endorsed my campaign.
Shy guy.
Shy guy. Okay. Now, do you support overdose prevention centers? And let's start with Larry.
I do. I'm very grateful that the legislature found the votes to override the governor's veto of the Overdose Prevention Center or in the supervised program in Burlington. And I would like to see if that that pilot site is found to be successful, I'd like to see it replicated across the state.
Tiff?
I do, and I advocated for it very strongly.
Okay.
I do.
Wonderful.
I do as well.
Wonderful. Perfect. Great, wonderful candidates that are going to represent you, at least two of them. And now we will allow them for 30 seconds for closing statements. All right, for this one, we start here and we end over there. Go ahead.
Well, you've heard me talk about a lot of my experience. I've been working to make the world better from our little home in Vermont for over 30 years. active in many different issues, and I have demonstrated my skill set in working with people across the aisle at every level of government, and including municipal government and up to the federal government and Congress in Washington. I think that is very relevant to the requirements for serving as a state representative and being effective in that role. I just will share that there's a lot more information about my background and my positions on issues at my campaign website, which is very easy to remember. It's larry4vt.org, and I would encourage everybody to take a look, and if you like what you see, be in touch. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much.
You know, it's been a real honor to serve in the legislature. I mean, I took my oath of office when on January 6th, when the Capitol was stormed, and there was kind of no greater realization about the importance of democracy and the democratic process. I guess I am hopeful that I'll be sent back, and yet I love my district because people are so engaged. I hear from a lot of constituents a lot of the time, and and I think that the district will be very well served, whoever is elected.
Okay, wonderful.
You know, I want to take these concluding remarks just to thank Town Meeting TV for organizing this forum. Thanks for having me on. Thanks to all the people watching and listening, and thanks to everyone in Burlington. Special thanks to all of you who've told me that you've already voted for me. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And my thanks to Dale, Tiff, and Larry for making this a very positive campaign. Thank you all.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I want to echo Bram's gratitude. I also want to say, as I've been knocking on doors, I typically ask people what they think the most important issue for us to be dealing with in Montpelier is. My favorite answer was the woman who said, "We need more kindness." And it's just stuck with me. Along with that, I think about the importance of listening. And I think we've talked here about issues, and we might have slight differences in our approach to these issues. But I hope that any of us will bring that kindness and that skill of listening to the legislature.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you again all so much for the candidates for being here, for the stepping up to serve and wanting to go back and all of it. Thank you so much, and thank you for tuning in Town Meeting Television, ongoing coverage of local candidates, local budget, and ballot items. You can find this and many other forums on cctv.org/primaries or on your Town Meeting TV YouTube channel. And you can tune in for primary election recap show day after you cast your ballot on Tuesday, August 13. Contact your local clerk to find out about how you open your ballot and to register to vote. In Vermont, you can register on the same day, on the same spot. Thank you for watching and sharing Town Meeting TV. Thank you, candidate, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Yeah.